Welcome. My name is Linda Whitlock. I'm an independent director, a board member of the National Association of Corporate Directors, New England, and I'm the former co-chair of the Boston chapter of Women Corporate Directors. Thank you all for joining us today for our annual program that we jointly sponsor by NACD and WCD. We do love acronyms almost as much as we love director education. Because of our overlapping membership and our aligned missions, NACD and WCD have had a very strong partnership for a number of years, resulting in programs like today's, featuring exceptional industry thought leaders who help us as directors enhance our knowledge, our skills, and our ability to better serve our boards and our companies. This year is no exception. Before we get started, we have a few of those obligatory housekeeping items. First, we love seeing all your faces. And so we will have speakers spotlighted for portions of the program. We do encourage you, our audience of attendees, to use your video as much as possible. Next, we ask that you remain muted throughout the program. And please use the chat function to pose questions. There's no need to wait until a formal question and answer portion of the program to submit questions. We will be monitoring the chat box during the panel discussion, and we'll have several breaks in the discussion when audience questions will be asked. I want to thank our chapter sponsors. We're deeply appreciative of their generosity, their loyalty, and their support of our work, particularly during these challenging months of the pandemic. Their investment in NACD has allowed us to deliver world-class, director-centric local programs with vitally important peer-to-peer sharing of insights. Together, we are advancing excellence in the boardroom. Today, we're highlighting two very loyal sponsors who have been stalwart supporters and allies. They are Rockland Trust and Deloitte. We owe them a large debt of gratitude for their faith in our work. Thank you. And finally, a reminder to please let us know your thoughts on the program. Shortly after the program, you'll receive a brief, and I promise it will be a very brief evaluation survey from Deb Rosenthal, our fabulous executive director. Please fill it out. It will take you no more than 2 or 3 minutes. Your feedback is essential for our work. And now, I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator, my friend and colleague, Fran Phillip. Fran is a longstanding member of both NACD and WCD, hence is the perfect person to moderate this joint program. Fran is an experienced board director with over 18 years of corporate board experience in small privately held companies, as well as large public companies. Fran spent her career in specialty retailing and retired in 2011 as Chief Merchandising Officer at LL Bean. That is one of my favorite retailers, probably yours as well, and certainly is one of the most recognized brands in the world. Fran's board roles have primarily been in multi-channel retailers and consumer brands. Fran is a Downeaster. She brings life to our being the New England chapter of NACD. Fran lives on the coast of Maine. After LL Bean, her favorite brand is Sea Bags, where she wears 3 hats, an indication of her skills and talents. She serves on the board of CBAGS as the lead director. She is an owner of the company, and she's the chief creative officer, balancing a great deal. Fran, we welcome you and thank you very much for being our moderator today.
Thank you, Linda, and good afternoon to all of our attendees. It has been the most gorgeous fall day here in New England. It's as warm in Maine as it is down in Boston, 75 degrees. So I hope you all had a great day and that this interesting panel will be a great cap to it. Although I am very sorry, as I know all of us are, that we cannot do it in person. We're here to talk about and learn about what is happening in the very dynamic and fast-paced world of digital marketing. The global pandemic forced all businesses to rethink their customer engagement strategy, especially, although not only in the digital arena. Those in their infancy had to pivot and speed up dramatically, while those with an already strong presence had to quickly double down. We have an excellent and very experienced panel who are going to share some of their customer engagement stories through the pandemic. I hope that by the end of the session, even if you're not the marketing expert on your board, you'll come away with a better sense of what the board needs to know about your company's marketing journey and what may be coming next around the corner. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting with Kip Bodner. Kip is the Chief Marketing Officer at HubSpot, a leading CRM platform for scaling companies. He leads a team of 400 marketers and is responsible for HubSpot's brand and global marketing strategy. Kip is a co-author of the book, The B2B Social Media Book, Becoming a Marketing Superstar by Generating Leads with Blogging, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, email, and more. Next, Alistar Ironside, who serves as the Chief Marketing Officer for Rockland Trust Bank and brings over 25 years of experience in financial services to our conversation today. In addition to leading marketing and product management at B of A and Barclays, Alistar also led Liberty Mutual's Global Internet Strategy Group. Alistar also has a passion for cheese and spent time as a cheesemonger, curating tasting experiences to his customers' individual tastes. Talk about one-to-one marketing. Ashley Reichheld is a principal at Deloitte Digital, where she leads the consumer, customer, and brand experience practice. Ashley has spent the last 20 years helping her clients to reimagine brands and experiences, shaping the moments that matter the most to customers, workforce, and partners. Ashley is deeply passionate about the topic of trust and is the author of the upcoming book, A New Measure of Trust. So thank you to all my panelists for agreeing to share your wonderful insights and stories with us today. I'm going to start with our first question. The pandemic dramatically and rapidly changed the way customers shop by driving them to the web like never before. In what other ways did the pandemic change what customers expect from a brand or even from a vendor? I thought I'd lead off with Alistar on this question.
Sure. Thank you, Fran. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me. Glad to be here. So, customers always wanted brands and suppliers to provide convenience, make life easier, and that just hasn't changed. And what I would say is through the prolonged uncertainty of the last 12, 15, 18, add a month every month, customers are also, I think, looking for brands to make their lives manageable. And what I mean by that in our context, so banking, safe ways to interact. And, for some companies, that safety might be hygiene. For us, safety also means security and security of information. And customers have become very sensitized to that because there's been a lot of increased fraud during the last year or so, a lot of opportunities, unfortunately. And so customers, especially as they've gone more and more online, have become more attuned to some of the risks, and unfortunately, some have been caught out there. Another really important one is dependability. I think customers are looking for their providers, their brands, their bank to just be there. And we found this incredibly important at times during the last year or so, when some of our competitors were, struggling to maintain hours at certain branches, and they were just unable to keep them open. And it was amazing how customers in the community were so concerned about whether we would be able to keep our doors open, and how glad they were when they were able to find the bank there where they wanted it. And I think connected to that is just reassurance. From time to time, customers have really come forward looking for reassurance. We don't always have all of the answers or all of the information for them, but they know that we can be understanding, and we can provide some type of, not just continuity, but also some level of advice. And probably a theme that will go through all of my answers this afternoon is, I think consumers are looking for all of these interactions to be more human and relatable. And if anything, strangely enough, the pandemic, which drove so many people online and digital, I think the pandemic accentuated this need, certainly in our business, in our community banking and business banking business, that being human, being relatable has never been more important. And actually, some of the technology that we're really excited about, whether it's in marketing or whether it's in channel development, is in the areas where we can actually enhance and enrich relationships that we've built, even if we're not interacting in person. So it's all about building on the connections, but reinforcing the opportunities when we're able to be face-to-face with customers using that technology. And that all serves these needs that have come up over the last 18 months.
That is a list of really interesting and great insights. I was taking notes myself while you were talking, Alistar. Ashley, I know you've got some thoughts on this topic as well, and saw some different ways, that it changed during the pandemic.
Well, I was delighted to hear Alistar use the word human, because I think it's underused and it needs to be used more often. The pandemic underscored the importance of humanity, the need to connect on a human level and really be authentic. So I love that comment. At the outset of the pandemic, our team undertook research around the human experience and what it meant, what it was like in times of uncertainty. And one of the single biggest learnings for us at the time was what was happening in the world of trust, actually. We saw a pretty significant decline in customer trust, in employee trust. And this wasn't limited to corporations. This was true for NGOs, it was true for governments, it's true of healthcare agencies. So we're in a moment of crisis, and that our trust in these organizations is on the decline. It's epidemic to some degree. And the reason it matters so much is because trust is deeply linked to our experience and to our behaviors. Trust arguably is one of the primary drivers of how we behave. When a person trusts a company, they're 87% more likely to buy a brand, 62% of them are loyal. Employees are much more likely to stay, to work longer, to be satisfied with salary. So we know it's important. And we also saw the decline at the same time. In our own research, for example, we asked people, how do you know when it's safe to return? When is it safe to go back and fly on a plane or go eat at a restaurant? And only 4% would trust companies to tell them that it's okay to return, which is alarmingly low. Almost 50% of employees didn't trust their employer. We actually saw some pretty interesting age differences as well. Younger consumers were significantly more likely to trust the brand they were engaging with versus older consumers. And Alistar, you mentioned the importance of digital and how heightened this became in the course of the pandemic. We think those things are linked. Younger consumers being much more able to navigate the digital world that we live in, much more agency over finding the information they need and being able to interact with brands feasibly. Whereas older generations just didn't have that as much, and therefore trusted those brands less. So that is one of the things that I would definitely call out as something that emerged as a significant issue, and we think will continue to be a significant issue as consumers and employees and partners start to re-engage with organizations.
That is such interesting data, Ashley. Thank you for sharing it with you. Kind of frightening data, actually, if you're a brand or a company. My second question is, as the world becomes increasingly digital and perhaps impersonal, as we've been talking about, what is your company doing to retain, create that sense of personal and caring service? And I guess I'm going to look to Kip to answer this. And Kip, maybe it's really not your company, but some of the companies that you've been advising, you've seen different things that they've done in this regard.
Yeah, I'll start with the HubSpot example, and we'll go from there. Our chief people officer, my friend Katie Burke, likes to say, "Clarity is kindness." And in the pandemic, that was never more true. And what we did in the very early days of the pandemic is, over the course of a couple of days, made a bunch of sweeping decisions on collections, pricing changes, things that were going to dramatically influence our partners and our customers' ability to keep the lights on, run the business. We knew that we had cash on a balance sheet and we could take risks that a lot of our customers couldn't. And Alistar talked about being human, and that is fundamental, is making decisions that are truly customer first, and then making those decisions quickly and clearly, and getting the communication out and letting people know this is what we're going to do. And it turns out that those decisions are always way more rewarded than you think. That those customers who we helped, they retained and paid us at a far higher rate than we'd ever modeled or expected, right? And their long-term loyalty to us, and especially our partners who provide services on top of our software, were just completely indebted to us. And so that was the first thing we did. Then we did one other thing. The next thing we did to get clarity is we knew that we were sitting on this amazing data around how marketers and sellers were interacting with their consumers. And wow, me and my team, we're sitting around like, wow, our email click-through rate is way up, but our sales email response is way down. Is that everybody feeling that, or is that just us? We didn't know. And so we aggregated that data and cut it by company size and industry so that people could just say, oh, it's not just me. Like there are some benchmarks out there that help me understand what this looks like. And that built trust with our audience that, hey, we can provide and democratize access to that. And then the last thing I would say is, we found in this period of the pandemic, while things moved online, people wanted human-led automation, right? They wanted to do things themselves. They were very stressed. They were uncertain about what they wanted to do. And the idea of friction coming into the customer experience was just so much lower tolerated. And so we leaned heavily into email automation, website chat and chat automation. And we saw the amount of people chatting with us on our website through the pandemic more than double, right? It's just people want to self-serve and feel like they have a good resource to do that. And so a lot of people may, on the surface, see that as an impersonal way to interact, but it's actually a customer preference going forward.
That is so interesting, Kip. Really, I would not have guessed that, but it makes a lot of sense. Alistar, do you have any ways that you can tell us that your bank did during the pandemic to make it seem, make your banking services be that more personal and caring touch?
Sure. In some ways, this is like a, whatever you call it, a home run pitch for me. This is so much central to what Rockland Trust stands for. We're known for the relationships we create. We want our bankers to get to know their customers, their communities, and almost become an extension of family, so the customers and the family and the business and the community all become one, because it's a people business. Although some people say banking is a data business, you can make it bits and bytes, but it's really a people business. And so for us, it's so essential that we can make a difference for our customers. And we have done a few things over the last 12 months. And, probably the underlying premise of it all for us is that what our frontline people can do can't be replaced or replicated by a machine, but it can be supported or augmented by it. Our branch traffic decreased significantly last year. It's still down a little this year over 2019. So, we've had to look for ways to connect our bankers with their customers when they're not kind of in the branch itself or outside of branch hours. And we've actually discovered, and we've started using some technology that doesn't replace experiences and personal relationships, but actually helps to augment them. And I think the case study is attached to some of the materials for this meeting, but we have a service called Your Banker, which we started a few months ago. And it's a way that customers can actually select a banker of their choice. So they see profile cards, they can choose which banker they would like to deal with or to have as their banker. And they actually connect online. They connect digitally with using their phone, their iPhone, in a way that is somewhere between, chat. It's not text chat. It's not a bot, but it's also not totally personal. It's not video banking, but they're able to build some type of connection with this person because they're going to be contacting the same banker each time they may have a question or want some service. So it's creating a hybrid experience, so powered by technology, but emphasizing the personal touch. We like that a lot.
No, it's so cool because it puts a human face to the transaction. We have a polling question we'd like to send out to the audience. Deb, are we ready to go with that? Okay, there we go. So since the pandemic, how has the amount of time and attention given to this topic of customer engagement changed on your board? We'll leave the poll open for a few seconds so people can respond. Okay, there are the results. Wow. Okay, so for 89% of the boards represented in our call, it increased either some or significantly. So makes our topic today super relevant. Thank you all for sharing that. My next question is, again, I mean, we're sort of building on the same theme here. What are ways technology can be used to actually enhance the customer experience in perhaps an unexpected way? And Alistar, you just gave us a perfect example. I'm wondering if Ashley could give us another example.
Absolutely. I mean, to give context to what I'm about to say, I think we're finding ourselves in yet another new age of marketing. We've always been brand ambassadors, but now we're responsible for communicating our organization's purpose as well, which means communicating transparently. It means communicating authentically. And it also means increasingly focusing on connecting at the human level, which technology is actually positioned to help us do really, really effectively, as long as we're doing that both transparently and with humanity in mind. What do I mean by that? Well, we have giant amounts of data now that we can use to help engage with customers more effectively. We can do that across multiple channels. Alistar mentioned the kind of mid version between a person versus a chatbot. There are so many tools we have for making sure we can elevate somebody's experience. We need to do that, keeping them in mind. So sharing with them content and offers and things that are interesting to them versus the things that we want to share. So for example, I think I probably got 12 calls over the course of the first 6 months of the pandemic asking me if I wanted to buy a timeshare to go on vacation. It wasn't particularly relevant at the time, but there's a balance that we have to make sure we get right between what I'd call creepy versus being helpful. So really knowing our customers, engaging with them on the topics that they want, and using their data for them and not just for us, and making sure that feels comfortable to them versus on the creepy side for them. And technology is what allows us to do that.
Great. And then I thought, Kip, you might have a story to share with us as well on this topic.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about technology, I think it's about how you use technology. And I think there's three kind of core areas where we saw technology use and investment really change a lot over the course of the pandemic. The first touched on earlier, automation. Customers just want more personalized automation to scale interactions. We saw that through automating sales engagements, customer support engagements on the B2B side of things, that the success of automation technology has really been astounding, growing through the roof. The next area of focus that we saw a lot of development in is education. One of the things, like we have a HubSpot Academy that teaches marketers and sellers and customer service professionals how to do their job well. And throughout the pandemic, the interest in education grew through the roof. People were thinking about how they could better themselves. And so technology that enables you to not just provide education, but to certify, test people's knowledge, and let people have real credentials that they can use and take somewhere in the marketplace that are actually valuable is becoming hugely important. And the last thing I would say that we've seen a lot of is community. You know, I think Ashley has talked a lot about community, and so has Alistar, is like community in the absence of a lot of in-person conversations has become so incredibly important online. And we have seen our customer communities, our just industry communities grow significantly, and the technology around rewarding community engagement, moderating community engagement, automating and recommending the right types of topics within the community for people is just become very transformative over the course of the pandemic.
So interesting. And communities now really being defined differently because we're not able to physically be in our communities all the time. So we have to be in our online communities, whatever they may be. My church went completely online and still is. So that whole church community all of a sudden became a very different experience for me, but as important or more than it was before the pandemic. We have another polling question, I think, to put up. Number 2. So this one is, does your company have a role or position with customer engagement or customer experience in the title? We're seeing this more and more out there in search. And I'm just wondering, you know, what you're seeing in the company that you're on the board of or connected with. Okay, so about half of you have it either as a separate standalone role or incorporated into somebody else's bigger group of responsibilities, and about half of you know, not really. I think this is a growing trend. I'd actually love to see what the panel thinks about that. It's not in our scripted questions, but I bet Ashley can tell us something about that. Are you seeing that more as a role in companies you're consulting to?
Absolutely. It's a common practice now in the consumer industry to have a chief experience officer, and we're starting to see that spread to other places as well. The notion of experience being a critical differentiator for companies has only increased over the past number of years, and we expect it to increase. So I'd expect to see more in the future as well.
Yeah. Kip, are you seeing it with the companies you advise as
Yeah,
well?
100%. I mean, at HubSpot, we have a chief customer officer, and I think on the B2B side, that's the common framing of this. And you're seeing people, seeing executives, most startups that I'm advising now, early stage, are hiring chief customer officers who can lead the entire customer experience from marketing, sales, customer success, and support. And I think that's going to be a mainstay on the B2B side of the world.
And that's B2B, not B2C.
Yeah,
you're seeing.
that is all B2B.
So interesting. Okay, our next question for the panel is, and this is a hot topic right now, what about the role of government and all the new privacy guidelines? How are those going to affect how you market and communicate with your customers? And Kip, I'm going to go back to you on that one
Sure.
first.
Yeah, so I think you see government regulations like GDPR in Europe and lots of other regulations in the US and abroad. But what that's actually driving, it's driving self-regulation by the large companies who have access to data. And you're seeing this with Apple and Google making pretty aggressive and sweeping privacy changes, especially as it relates to data and tracking on websites and for advertising. And this comes at a really tricky time, you know? Advertising costs on Google and Facebook rose over 40% year over year, while inventory only rose 7%, right? And there's a lot of capital in the market. You're going to continue to see a massive growth in ad costs, and the privacy and the data access, especially I think over the next 1 to 3 years, is going to take performance down. And it's going to make sure that if you're going to be successful in this new world, you are going to have great first party data about your customers and your prospects. You need to own the relationship with your community and your customers, not have to go through a third party, because then you are going to be at the mercy of the privacy regulations. And every marketer that I'm talking to is obsessed about building first party data, building it through great education, great community, and trying to get farther ahead so that they can invest less in paid marketing and more in kind of owned content and marketing channels.
Ashley, I see you nodding your head, so you're in, I think, violent agreement with this notion.
I think it's really well said. I think companies, what I really liked about what Kip said is the word self-regulation. The interesting part of what we're seeing is that privacy regulations really do vary quite a bit. It's much stricter in Europe than it is in the US. It's stricter in California than it is in other states. And as a result, there's kind of a gap in what companies should actually be doing. Certainly, we have some hurdles. We're all talking about the cookieless future, the need to get to first party data, the need to actually find people more effectively instead of having to blast it out to everybody. The ROI on those marketing efforts is terrible. So finding that one-to-one, using our microsegments to be more effective, but also really holding ourselves accountable for how and why we use the data that we use. Companies, if you think about trust again, my favorite topic, one of the key drivers of trust is transparency. And in particular, in transparency, it's how and why my data is used. If you were to read every term that you've signed up for in the past year or two, for every app you've downloaded, for every website you've gone onto, it would take you years of your life. None of us do that. We all skip right past it and say, agree, keep going. But the problem with that is that we actually don't know what's happening with our data. How is it being used? And there's increased sensitivity from the customer side in doing that. So companies will need to be able to self-regulate and to be very transparent and communicate to people about what they're doing with the data, and most importantly, why it matters to the person whose data they're using.
Yeah, exactly. We actually have a polling question on this topic that I'd like to go to now. Has your company been affected by the new privacy guidelines? Because not all companies have been, but many, especially B2C, have been.
You know, what's coming back, Fran, I would say that one of the important things to understand is that whatever the most stringent privacy reg is, whether it's in Europe or US or wherever it may be, it's just going to become the law of the land. Once you have to build the infrastructure to comply, it just becomes what it is. And so that's why you're seeing so much aggressive self-regulation, is that everybody's afraid of even more stringent regulation that is going to cause a lot more work from a compliance perspective.
That is a really good point, and really sort of a good signpost as to what's ahead for the future, because I think our audience members would like to get ahead of the curve on some of these topics as much as their companies can. All right, do we have results from that poll? So a third it hasn't affected, but 2/3 greatly or somewhat, which I'm not surprised by. And as Kip said, this is just going to intensify, and as we go on. I also want to stop briefly now and just see if there are any audience chat questions that we want to bring forward.
So for Alistar, a question is that in many banking institutions, you do not get to talk to a real person. You are forced to use an automated system. And how does that really work for developing long-term customer relationships when you're talking to a machine?
Well, I mean, my belief is that makes it a bit more difficult unless you have extraordinary products. But even then, you're not going to be able to build those same types of relationships. It depends too on scale. So I think a company that is in 25 states with 3 or 4 million customers might lean more towards automation, and a company that can, such as Rockland Trust, say, could drive from one end of its network to the other in a couple of hours. There's much more scope for benefits from leaning less towards total automation. So it's a balance, it's a balancing act. And it's not to say that automated or digital transactions need to be, need to have no personality, but it does make it a little bit more difficult. And it depends too on the topic. So I think a lot of financial services is really complicated and very personal and very nuanced. And so machine-driven responses or programs that recommend something may come across as a little bit wooden or, off purpose. Whereas in some other types of industry, that might be perfectly adequate to be able to recommend things totally automatically.
That's very good question from the audience. And we have Alistar, the perfect person to respond to that. Thank you. Our next scheduled question is, what surprised you most doing business during the pandemic and keeping your customer engaged during that time? I mean, I think we've all talked about the big sea changes that happen and move to more digital, but were there some small but really surprising things that happened in your businesses? And I was going to start with Kip on that.
I think there were two big things that I maybe thought would happen, but never thought at the magnitude. One was speed. Companies wanted to transform quickly. I mean, we had people calling me like, I need to get started tomorrow. The urgency and the speed of transformation. And I'm sure Ashley has a bunch of awesome data around the speed of digital and business transformation from the pandemic, but I think it literally blew us away. And I think we're going to see the ramifications of that for years to come. And then I mentioned earlier, but the demand for education, people really put their head down and wanted to build a better business and took the opportunity of a difficult time to reset a strategy and take more risk. And when you take more risk, you need to learn new things. And the demand for education, especially online education, really honestly blew me away. It was far past anything I expected.
Interesting. Ashley, do you have some examples of something that really surprised you during? I know the whole loss of trust is not surprising. It's somewhat understandable, but within that, were there surprises for you?
Well, it's funny, Kip, you're so positive. I feel like I'm going to be the challenger to that and be negative for a
Please.
second. One of the things that surprised me most was the disconnect that some companies had with their customers. If you think about the return, for example, to restaurants and airlines, there was a big gap in the safety people were seeking versus the safety of things actually being provided. And you saw that really clearly on airlines, for example. Delta, with keeping the middle seat open, earned a huge amount of brand value throughout that relative to other airlines because they were really putting the human first. We actually have no data, by the way, as to whether or not that made a meaningful difference in terms of susceptibility, but we all valued it because we thought Delta was doing right by us. And we've seen that come out in the data recently too. We just surveyed a bunch of B2C leaders and we surveyed a bunch of consumers and asked them about their perceptions. And what we saw was pretty shocking. There was about a 40-point difference in the perceptions of trust. So B2C leaders consistently overestimated how trusted they were, 40% more often than consumers would tell them they were trusted. And as you dug into that, what was interesting about it is that the ways people expected to have their trust reinforced or built were different. So consumers are actually looking for different things than companies are doing. So I think as we kind of advance and become much more personalized and continue with our digital expansion, there's going to be the need to reconcile what consumers are really after versus what makes a company tick so that those things line up.
That's great. I know I was one of the people that thought the Delta middle seat was just a brilliant move. And it made a difference to me. It would be interesting to know what the real statistics on that were. The next question is, what learnings from keeping your customers engaged during the pandemic in your company did you end up actually carrying forward? And now they're just business as usual for you. And I'll start with Alistar on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This may be a natural follow-on from some of the comments Kip was making about, first of all, pace and then education, because on the pace thing, Plato, who I think is attributed with coming up with the expression about necessity being the mother of invention, although he didn't write in English, the fact that we just had to get things done made things get done more quickly. We learned that we could do it. And that was extraordinary. And probably for us, one strong example would be with the Paycheck Protection Program, which was thrust upon everybody. from the Small Business Administration, we had to scurry and scramble along with every other bank to put together systems and processes to get these things processed and approved at the same time as the capricious SBA, or I guess the SBA was learning from day to day as well. It was changing the rules each day. And so, you know, in our old paradigm, we would never have been able to catch up. We would have just said, we'll come back in 18 months with the solution. Here we had to literally work in real time. And for the rounds of PPP this year, we actually worked with a fintech, with a local fintech, in fact, which was able to piece together an application for us in weeks, which might have taken many months previously. And not just that, but adapt every day to things that came up. They were able to show us how, well, we can change that, we can change this. So that was, for us, was an extraordinary proof point that, you know, we really could do things quickly, and we could also depend upon really small providers who are hungry to get things done well. And then a small thing that we discovered, which goes to the community, to the education theme, I guess, is on communication. You know, we learned, we used to worry about frequency of outreach. In other words, how many times a month you touch or connect with somebody. Am I sending too many emails? Am I going over the, you know, over the top if I send you 3 in a month? Well, during PPP, some of our customers were asking for information every day. And no matter how many messages we provided, they still wanted more information. And then we ended up holding seminars, and webinars, which were attended not just by our customers, by our small business customers, but by consultants from other industries as well, because, you know, we just suddenly found that doubling down on this educational component was so important. So, you know, for us, that was something that we learned, and we can never help customers enough. We can never think enough about how to keep them learning about what they need to learn. And kind of also on the theme of education, we do a lot of financial literacy education or service in our communities. And again, by circumstance, we had to cancel what had been in-person Credit for Life fairs. We do musicals in schools for young children to learn about money. Those changed to virtual. And suddenly, from something that maybe touched a few hundred people every few months, we were able to, in fact, touch and treat 2,000 high schoolers in about 3 months with Credit for Life fairs, and 6,000 K-5 kids during the pandemic, you know, being entertained by this musical about money, which we wouldn't have thought about in the pre-pandemic days. We wouldn't have conceived of doing it virtually. It just didn't occur, right? And I guess you'd say, you know, what else are we carrying forward? Well, Teams and Zoom are not going to go away, and
right.
You know, rest in peace conference calls. So those are some of the things that we've encountered, and we're going to be carrying forwards.
I can really relate to your comment about the speed and the speed of decision making, and all the companies that I'm associated with. The speed of how we made decisions. I mean, you know, because the information about COVID was changing daily, and we had to make, our CEOs had to make decisions so quickly, and they had to delegate the decision making down to much lower levels than normally. So I saw every company I work with become much more nimble, much more agile. And one of the things we've said to our CEOs as we sort of come out of the pandemic is, don't change that. We know we can work that quickly, and we can work with more delegation. Let's keep that, because it makes the company more entrepreneurial and gets things done faster. Kip, I see you're nodding your head. So you were next for me to ask that same question. What are your companies or HubSpot doing to carry forward some of the things that you started doing differently during the pandemic, make them business as usual?
Yeah, our former COO, JD Sherman, a friend of mine, would say, never waste a good crisis. You know, when things are bad, you have the opportunity to change, you know, and the risk of change is much lower. And so I think there were a lot of things that on that, but one of the biggest things, that's the hardest things to change, especially if you're a software business, is your pricing and packaging. You have a big install base, there's risks in that. It's a really hard thing to do. but we drastically changed the low end of our pricing and packaging for the low end of our product and turned it into a bundle. We knew there was a lot of price sensitivity at the low end of the market. And we had so much success with that. People adopting, people paying a little bit of money to get real value, and then a percentage of those people going on and upgrading to our higher priced products, that it is going to be a mainstay of our business strategy that was probably accelerated greatly by the pandemic. So I think there's tough business decisions like that I think everybody's probably was forced to make that are sticking around. And then I think the second part of that is what Alistar kind of alluded to on the experiences side of things. You know, this week is our annual event, and it used to be we take over the whole Seaport and the Convention and Expo Center, and now it's 100% virtual, and we're never going to go back to just a physical event, right? There will always be a virtual component of any major event or experience we have. And that is, that's going to be, that was completely accelerated by the crisis, by the pandemic we're in. So I think those are two big areas that change significantly and in a permanent way.
Those are great examples. Thank you, Kip. And Pam, I'd like to go to the chat and see if there are any more questions from our audience.
Well, there are lots of questions. I'd like to combine two of them because I think that they really are getting at the same thing. And it's essentially that how do you find the optimal balance between tools and human touch to meet the customers where they want to be? And because someone else raised the point that tools are very good at the top of the funnel, but especially for large dollar transactions, at some point, they want that human touch. And so how do you know to transition from tools or technology to people? And how do you find that balance for the customer?
Would you like me to have a go? I always say that make sure that we're making technology augment whatever it is we're trying to do. And if that is the connection with the customer or, the skill of our people in serving the customer, then let's have technology serving that end rather than, letting the tail wag the proverbial dog and just adopting technology because it can. Technology can do pretty much anything. Technology could probably replicate what I'm trying to say right now, but it's not always necessary to use it in that way. So I would just say make sure it's driven by what are you trying to accomplish with your customers in the end, and who's going to be the last person in the funnel on your side that is dealing with those customers, and let that person or that process drive the decision about whether to let technology take the lead or just be a partner in nudging that connection along.
Kip or Ashley, do you have something you'd like to add on this question? So it's a really interesting question and a hard one for companies sometimes to answer.
Ashley, go for it.
I would love to. Thanks, Kip. What you're really talking about is friction to some degree. How do you remove friction and make sure that you're creating things that are accessible for your customers and in the way they want to have them? I think, Debbie, you said it really well. You have to meet customers where they want to be met. The reality is we're going to have a very diverse set of customers, and we're going to have to balance a very diverse set of desires, needs, ways of interacting. I'm working with a company right now that purposely pushed their call center times because they wanted to drive customers away from calling in. That unfortunately had a very negative reaction. Actually, we did their math, and the longer you've been a customer or the more interactions you had with their contact center, the less you trusted their organization. So to try to be more efficient and push people into other channels, they actually created a new problem for themselves, which is now their customers don't really like them because they can't get answers when they need them. A better alternative might be to have a contact center option alongside digital engagement, alongside chatbots, alongside email, etc., because then people can actually take the channel that they need to take. And when they do have that hairy problem, they can get very quickly to a person, a human, who's going to help solve that issue. Somebody else in the chat, by the way, talked about the difference between a very small product or a very expensive product. And it's the correlation we're seeing there is actually changing. Auto is a really good example. People used to want to go and show up and buy a car in person, and increasingly we're seeing people buy cars online and have them delivered with the ability to test it out. And if you don't like it, send it back. So the personal touch in that case is actually not a human, it's the ability to interact with the product in the way you want to interact with the product before committing to it.
Humans are slow at a lot of things. You know, we confuse personal with efficient a lot of times. And, you know, I think people value their time. I think it's one of the other things that happened in the pandemic. People stopped commuting, they use their time differently, and they have different expectations for how quickly we can serve them.
And not just individual consumers, Kip, but business to business relationships. I mean,
Absolutely.
as a small business, you might own a small business in Maine. We have a very lean staff. Time is money to us. And so the whole way, the PPP, just the time suck that was. So anything, if you're in the business to business world, that you can do to make it easier for your business customer to get the services they need, the information they need, the pricing they need, faster and easier, because businesses are starved for time too right now. And during the pandemic, so much of business leaders and business managers' time was taken up with just increasing health and safety. I mean, all of a sudden that became 50% of what people were spending their time on. So there was less time to spend on running the day-to-day business in some cases. So it applies to the B2B world as well as B2C, I would think. Our last question of the evening is really thinking about this whole topic in the context of the boardroom. Many of our attendees, if not all, sit on one or more boards. And so I'm going to ask all three of you, what are the implications that you see for boardroom oversight? And what should our board directors in the audience be thinking about and asking about, you know, at future board meetings? And Ashley, I'll lead off with you on this one.
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record, and this is almost a personal plea, but I would ask our board members to start holding companies accountable for how they're building trust. We know that trust is a major driver of value. Trusted companies outperform everybody else by 2.5 times. The return on equity for trusted companies is 4x. Trust accounts for 60% of the variability you see in the stock market. So, you know, as a shareholder, that if you put your stock in a trusted company, you're much more likely to get the outcome that you're seeing. So I think we need to ask companies to be more transparent and explicit about their goals around trust, to measure them, to communicate them, and to hold ourselves accountable for building them. And by the way, I also think that serves the purpose of lining up what customers are looking for and asking for, their needs and values, with what the company needs and values. So it has a joint purpose that I think will help drive value for both.
That's great. You know, at LL Bean, we did a brand equity survey every year with our customers, and it measured a lot of things, but it interesting, didn't measure trust. And it probably should have. And probably
it's hard to do. You can't just ask, do you trust me?
No, you can't just ask, but it's an important to know. And now, Kip, your thoughts on this final question for our going into the boardroom. How do we take all that we've learned today and think about asking the right questions in the boardroom?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a summary of probably 3 things we've talked about today. One, who owns the customer experience at this business? You know, who's really, where does the buck stop for the customer experience? Do you need to have a chief customer officer or chief experience officer, or is it that line clear? 1. 2, what are you doing? How are you evolving your marketing and your customer experience for the pending data privacy changes that we're in the midst of happening and are going to continue to happen more aggressively? And is this business prepared to deal with them? And then the third is, wow, the pandemic's accelerated digital transformation and a push towards convenience and automation. How are we thinking about investing more in automation and less in manual, very human-led processes? And I think those are the 3 questions I'd hope.
Those are great questions I hope everybody wrote those down. I know I was writing them down to think about at our next board meetings. And I'll finish up with you, Alistar, on that same question.
It's funny, Kip, I hope none of Rockland Trust directors are on this call, although I think they are. We may be asking those questions in a few weeks' time.
Fair enough.
So this is my chance to say, let's ration PowerPoint and make sure that there's a restriction on the number of pages.
Yes.
No. So I think the angle I would take, and maybe it's a little bit counter to what Kip is saying, which clearly technology is at the core of so much opportunity. One of my concerns is that, you know, even marketing technology, my goodness, it's a whole language unto itself, and tech stacks and platforms totally bamboozling. And there's just no shortage of technology solutions. They come out of the woodwork, and they get a they can just be adopted. They're taken on and purchased and contracted for. But I would ask the board to be really hard-minded about asking, are they solving problems? Are they doing, the proverbial jobs to be done? Are they addressing those things, or are they just doing something because they can? And I think just a really harsh lens on the purpose of technology investments and what end it is for could help, because we see companies everywhere, and banks are famous for it, really being held back by the corporate drag of incumbent technology. Some of it is very old, but some of it's also quite new, and it doesn't always talk to the other components, and it creates a whole inefficiency, even though the technology itself is super efficient. So that would be my my final angle on that.
Yeah, the next shiny new object is not always needed or wanted, right? So we are at the end of our formal program, so we're going to open it up for Q&A, and I think I'm relying on my friend Pam to help field these questions. Is that right, Pam?
True. So a question, does the seamless online experience spoil customers so that when they interact in person, such as in a retail outlet, that they have less patience than in the past? And what can companies do about this?
Who would like to take that?
I would love to give you an example of somebody who's done it well versus not done it well. I think the truth is we are going to have to plan for a physical and digital world regardless. We won't live in one, we're going to live in both continuously, and companies need to plan for that as well. My favorite example to point to are Chipotle and Starbucks, who launched their apps around the same time. The difference was that one planned better than the other. Starbucks launched their app and they had customers waiting around the door for minutes and minutes and minutes because they hadn't thought about where they were going to pick it up and who was actually making those drinks versus making the drinks for the people in front of you. Chipotle basically cut a hole in the wall, let you pick it up there, and had a separate line of workers making food so that the people ordering in person didn't wonder why their burrito wasn't being made next. So the short story is it takes a little bit of planning, and we have to realize that these things are going to be seamless in the future, not one versus the other.
Kip, can you share some insight here as well? I'm sure this is something you've come across many times with your customers.
Yeah, it's definitely, the perceptions are changing. People are getting less patient, right? And we're seeing that with our customers, right? Our customers are coming to us because they're trying to adopt technology to help them deliver a more seamless customer experience, right? And in doing so, what we've seen is that technology can actually facilitate the in-person interaction just as it can the non-in-person interaction. And that's, I think, the core insight here is you can't think of them as a binary either or decision. It's great. I have an amazing set of data that can power really amazing automation, but can power really compelling in-person action and help save people time and help customers feel more connected and trust that brand much more. And I think that's what we are seeing, is that the companies that are ultimately winning are using technology to focus on both sides, as Ashley had mentioned.
That is really fascinating. I love that. Pam, do we have any more questions in the audience?
Just one more, because I think that the panelists have answered most of them. But one of the questions is, where do you see retail going? We're seeing more and more being done online. Does anybody have a prediction in the future of what percentage for these omni-channel retailers will be online and what will be in person?
Let's see. I'll start with Ashley on that one.
Well, I'm not a betting lady, so it'd be hard to say that one is going to supersede the other. I think that my perspective would be that both are going to remain, but in different ways than you might expect versus today. You're going to see more innovation around how those two channels interact. And to the earlier point, they are going to become seamless. We've seen a number of companies struggle to maintain in-person operations. I mean, you can count the number of retail marketers that have gone out of business in the past decade or so because they haven't been able to adopt the physical digital reality that they need to. But given that we are humans and we do crave social interaction and we do like to touch, feel, see, think about things, we do like to experience things, I don't think we're going to live in a virtual reality. And I think the meta world is quite a ways away.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to chime in here since I've been in retail my whole career and I'm on the board of some retailers and I own a retailer, is the customer still wants to come into the physical store, but they want it to be even more experiential than it ever was. So if you can delight all five senses when they're in your physical store, that's becoming more and more important as well. But there is also this wonderful blend of technology, as we've been speaking about. So you can come into a CBAG store and there's an iPad where we can help you design your own CBAG. So we're bringing technology into the store. It's a wonderful experience. A consumer is a designer for a day, and who doesn't want to be a designer at some point? So it's bringing that experience, physical. It can be tasty. I know many retailers after the pandemic are adding small food kiosks or coffee kiosks or cold drinks. Again, trying to bring all five senses into the retail experience so that it's an even more compelling reason to leave the comfort and safety of your own home, shopping on Amazon or wherever your preference is, and actually have a much bigger set of benefits by going into a retail store. And I really believe the retailers are going to win coming out of this are the ones that figure that out and bring their brand to life in a multi-sensory way in the brick and mortar format, which you totally cannot do online. Did you want to add anything here, Kip, about from the banking perspective? Because I mean, you are retail in a way, you have retail locations.
Sorry, wait, Alistar, you meant
Alistar, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Actually, no, I was going to cross-reference your mention of the five senses and sensory experiences. I think is spot on, and it made me think back to cheese retailing and specialty food stores. But in any retail experience, there's nothing quite like you can touch leather, you can smell leather, you can configure the colors online perhaps, and that might be delightful, but it's not the same as being able to appeal to more senses. In a service industry like banking, I think some of those dimensions are a little bit different, but there's still the relatability of a person who wants to listen to and speak to you about, there are just so many stories behind why people are either running out of money or what they're going to do with money or why they're borrowing that go beyond fulfilling the specific need. And so again, we find that those things do seem to occur much better in person. A lot of people still like to talk about their money with somebody in a branch. And of course, a lot of people have moved, also don't want to do that anymore. And there'll probably be a continuation of both types of banking servicing, just as I suspect there will with the retailing of anything.
I'm still waiting for my local Freeport branch of my bank to bring back the M&M dispenser that disappeared at the beginning of the COVID. And I don't know if it will make a return appearance. And my dog is still waiting for them to bring back the jar of dog treats that they keep on the counter. And they encourage dogs to come into the branch, put their paws up and get a dog treat. At the same time, I'm getting my M&Ms. This has been such an interesting panel. I am just blown away by all the great information that the three of you have shared. I know I've taken a lot of notes here. It made me think about a lot of things differently. I think we heard a lot of common themes from all three panels, even though they come at this from different industries and different perspectives. And it's about, I think one word that we kept hearing all over and over again is human. And how do you use technology actually to make things more human? How do you use education to your benefit, to your advantage? We talked a lot about trust. I loved Kip's comment, clarity is kindness. And I think clarity of communication and information became such a critical thing during the pandemic. Both internal communications and external communications in companies. And I agreed with one of the earlier points Alistar made is it's always been to me about making life more easier and manageable, solving problems for the customers. They are looking to you, whether you're B2B or B2C, to provide solutions. How we deliver those solutions had to change a lot during the pandemic, but all three of you have given us great examples of how did that make happen, and also some watch outs for what's coming around the corner, specifically in the area of regulation. And as Kip has said several times, and I agree with him, it's just going to increase. and become more widespread. And so companies that start self-policing it and having that one-on-one, owning the relationship between their customer directly, will be the ones that win. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Linda, I think, right?
That's right. Thank you. What an extraordinary conversation. Alistar, Ashley, and Kip, you have helped us to understand what it is that customers want, whether the customers are businesses or whether the customers are consumers. And I think my takeaways are similar to Fran's. Human, trust, kindness. And for us as directors, for us as company executives, to realize that despite the fact that we've been in a digital world, imposed in large part by the pandemic, we will always have human interaction, multi-sensory experiences. We always need to have our businesses, our products and services be relatable, have to remove friction for customers, and to emphasize transparency and speed of decision-making. That was a very important takeaway for me as well, that is kindness for customers. I'll finish up with a handful of quick announcements, and then you'll be able to be on your way. First, NACD's fall calendar of programs is set, and we have an excellent lineup. And you can get a sense of future programs by the quality, the caliber of today's conversation. All our programs will be virtual through January. And no doubt, like you, we hope that within the new year, we'll be able to resume in-person programs, because we're tired of having a screen always be between us and our colleagues and our audience. So here are some future programs I'll quickly list. On October 26th, we're going to hear from Jim Cunha, who's spearheading the Boston Fed's, the Boston Federal Reserve Bank's blockchain and digital currency efforts. He's going to help us understand, with this emergence of digital currency, what is it that our boards need to know. On November 17th, we'll gather to discuss the role of the board in human capital management. There's that concept again, human. Human capital, as we know and have discussed today, is no longer about compensation, is no longer about recruitment, development, recognition, and succession. It's about the shift in the view that we have of our employees as stakeholders. And clearly, it's indicated by their view of themselves as critical stakeholders. On December 16th, we'll tackle the disruption in many vital areas of supply chain. And you know the challenges from your own company's experiences, as well as from all of the stories that populate the financial and the popular press. On January 11th, and this is a very important program that we have done the past few years, we'll hold our annual proxy season preview. And this is a joint program with NACD's Philadelphia chapter. This year, we'll focus on environment, social, and governance matters, ESG. So January 11th, definitely put that on your calendar. Other programs that we'll have in 2022 will include programs for aspiring board directors, programs for seasoned board directors, as well as a new thought leadership series that we are creating. Every Tuesday, now that we know who you are, we have all of your email addresses, expect to get in your inbox a list of our upcoming events. And then finally, the very brief post-event survey. Please, we need and value your feedback. You're our customers, as it were, for today's session. And you can help us then provide a better experience for you and for other customers in the future. So please fill that out. Again, panelists, Kip, Ashley, Alistar, you were terrific. And Fran, our moderator, what expertise and a spirit and capabilities you brought to the role. Thank you very much. And to my NACD and WCD colleagues, particularly Ellen Richstone, Deb Rosenthal, and Pam Lanahan, thank you so much for your contribution to today's session. Thank you all. Stay safe, be well, and have a great evening. Goodbye.